As with any sponsored video, we will have a copy of this one, probably 2, to give away. Just let us know your thoughts down in the comments. We're going to take a look at the game Selfloss, which releases on the 12th, is created by Goodwin Games and published by Merge.
Yep, this deals with the subject of loss and is based on Slavic mythology or folklore. And it definitely has a feel of something like Bramble about it if you've ever played that game, but we'll go into the full details in a moment. So what exactly is Selfloss? Well, let's find out.
The narrative begins with you taking control of an old man who's sent on a journey, and you're introduced to this Selfloss ritual.
Yeah, so the Selfloss ritual itself is performed to heal the wounds of one who has lost a loved one, and in order for it to be performed, it requires an item of personal value to both the subject and the deceased, as well as the essence of a lost fish.
The narrative's quite opaque as you go through it, and you will find little pieces of lore dotted about the world, small notes that you can highlight with your light ability, shone on them will then reveal their knowledge.
Let's move on to the gameplay then, and the whole purpose of the Selfloss ritual is that you will come across certain characters or creatures that will need you to perform this for them in order for them to move on, both figuratively and literally at times, as this will help you to progress through to parts of the area that you couldn't otherwise reach. It's played from a top-down, almost isometric perspective, and it's a mix of puzzle solving and some action segments. There is some combat in the game as well as some boss battles.
Yeah, it's one of those games where the visuals play into the storytelling just as much as any narrative would. You start out in a little boat sailing across a very choppy set of seas, and I will say the handling of the boat's very nice. You feel the effects of the water and the wind, and it sets up its general gameplay very quickly with a short puzzle where you're lighting up different stones and then moving on.
Yeah, let's talk about that light feature then, because it is quite intrinsic to the gameplay. You have a staff that you will need to use at times, as Mark said, to light certain things up. You can put the staff down and then continue to shine this light. An early example of this is having to put your staff down to light up a particular, like a soft pad, you know, that the light will activate. It causes a bridge of light to appear that you can then run across, leaving your staff where it is to keep that light activated. You can then flip another switch to open a door and then make your way back and recall your staff.
It's another game that features the miasma. You've got this corruption in the world, and basically if you touch it for too long, it will build up on your character and cause damage to you. But there is a way to heal it, isn't there?
Yeah, it goes back again to that staff. You can lay it down and then shine the light upon yourself to heal yourself of that poison, and you'll need to do this at times because going through miasma infected areas will be essential if you want to reach where you need to go. As well as this, you'll take damage in combat, and there are more traditional ways of healing yourself here. You'll find like herbs scattered about that you can collect and use these with a press of the X button when you need them.
I was talking about the Neverending Story the other day, and some of the characters in that, like the giant turtle and stuff like that. Some of them kind of remind me, it has that kind of like 90s, you know, like the old animatronics.
Yes.
Like, although it doesn't look like that, a lot of the characters kind of remind me of those.
Yeah, I can see that. You'll come across huge, like larger than life characters or creatures at times, such as a turtle. It's a huge fish quite early on that you need to move out of the way by fulfilling some sort of requirement. But they do have that animatronic feel to them, you're right. And as I mentioned, moving them out of the way is performed by fulfilling their need, generally relating to the Selfloss ritual, and you'll need to find the items that they require and then return to them for them to move out of your way.
Now, when we first played this at Gamescom, it was quite a different build to the one that we've got for the final release, and I have to say I think it's an improvement over that game, and we were already enjoying it. Things like combat, early on you're fighting enemies, you have to shine a light on them and then they become almost like stone, don't they?
Yeah, so you have these, I don't know, they're like miasma inspired enemies, creatures that you'll need to fight. You shine the light on them to stun them, but they do become like almost like, I don't know, light rock creatures for a minute. But then you'll use your sickle, which you can use to harvest the herbs that I mentioned earlier, but you can also use it in combat to destroy them and collect their light, which you can then use to focus on items and move on. And yeah, that combat has definitely been introduced earlier than in the build that we used, and it looks like they've reworked some of the puzzles, some that were quite simple in the build that we used. The items have been moved about a bit now to make you search a bit more or you know, perform some sort of puzzle to get them, and I do think it improves the game. Obviously you play as an older gentleman and you move As you would expect, with that in mind, you do have a run button, which is performed by pressing A or holding down A. It doesn't really change the pace a whole lot, but it is in keeping with the character. You do also have a roll, like an evasive roll, that you'll need to use at times, but it's about knowing, certainly in combat, when to fight directly and when to lay that staff down and keep them at arm's length until they freeze, and then obviously go in for the kill.
Absolutely. In terms of movement, he very much controls as you would expect. This is not a sprightly gentleman, his rolls are slower paced, but it is actually quite responsive in terms of the way you can turn and move the character around.
Yeah, that applies to the boat as well. I found those sections, nice and responsive, nice and tight when you're going around corners and sharp turns in the rivers and seas, and they work very well. It feels good. It's nice to be in that boat. Now, we mentioned earlier that there'll be boss battles at times, and we played one of these at Gamescom, and it did take a good while to beat, and that's that of a mermaid who has kind of that siren's call, and as you get closer, the scream that she emits reduces your health meter to such a point that you won't last long if you don't take cover. These were a good mix of like puzzle and action, but they made good use of your environment to try and defeat the enemy.
Yeah, it's trying to get you to really get to grips with the sailing of that boat, and you have to kind of master a dash move within it. That you could go faster briefly, couldn't you?
Yes, you had to light up a number of symbols in order to open a door to get past this particular boss at least. And as Mark mentioned, it's about having good control of your boat, knowing when to stop and hide behind rocks and what have you, so you're not affected by the mermaid's call, but then dashing as soon as you can. And it is a good mix of all of those elements, and quite interested to see what the future bosses look like too.
The only negative I would say is sometimes the camera can get a little occluded when you move behind certain scenery items, as you can't actually directly control that. But we did find that's few and far between, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's just that depth perception at times, and obviously coupled with a fixed camera perspective. Certain objects do become transparent as you walk past them, or behind them, I should say, but that doesn't apply necessarily to larger items like houses. So it is something that will happen at times, but you're literally walking past them, so you're gone before it's ever really an issue.
There are lots of different collectibles around the world as well, and generally they're related to lore items. So when you find those, it will just give you a little bit more of that backstory of the world, I guess.
Yeah, they feel like collectible trading cards, and you'll need to perform certain puzzles to get some of them. Some of them are given to you through story beats. And it's always, I just enjoy things like that. I like having a look at the screen where you start to build those cards up, or whatever it may be in other games, and just to see exactly how many you've got, see the ones you've missed, so it's for you to bear in mind for future playthroughs as well.
It's a funny one, that, isn't it? I think it's a great way of getting players to actually explore your world, in an organic way. Very often games have these huge worlds, and then developers are like, why haven't they gone and looked over there? And it's like, well, actually, it's just a dead end.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Exactly. But having that little incentive does make a big difference, and it is a lovely world to explore. It's, we'll look at the visuals in a moment, but it does have a mystical quality to it.
Yeah, on those visuals then, well, it's targeting 30 frames per second. It is dropping below that from time to time in docked mode. Handheld seems to be a little bit better. It doesn't affect the gameplay as much as it would in a faster paced game, but those drops are there and certainly warrant a mention. But the visual quality is very nice, and those light and dark effects look excellent.
Yeah, it uses a low poly style to create its world, and coupled with that isometric viewpoint, which I've always loved in games, going all the way back to the home computers of the 1980s. It uses obviously a colour palette that is quite sombre, but again, bearing in mind the subject matter, it works in its favour, and it does really accentuate the lighter areas as you reach them. The towns, even if they're not populated anymore, do have that sprig of colour to them. The creatures you meet, the essences of certain creatures that you'll find are much brighter than the rest of the world, and stand out because of it. It is really quite lovely, to be honest.
It is. It's a great looking game. Now, on the audio front, this stood out to me this time round. I think when we played it at Gamescom, you can't hear your own self think, really. And sitting down and listening to the soundtrack, particularly in the earlier areas, it did give me Disco Elysium vibes. What that game does is use a lot of unusual ambient sounds alongside the occasional musical beats.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's The musical beats in particular are quite haunting, and they mesh quite well with the very natural sounding ambience, as you mentioned, to create a world that feels, normal, but there's definitely something going on at the same time. But it doesn't feel as dark. I mentioned Bramble at the beginning, very briefly, which is another game published by Merge, by the way, very good game. Whereas that was very dark quite early on. This feels as if there's something unnerving going on, but it takes a while. It's quite a slow build in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. You've nailed it there. It has that macabre feel, and that's the same as Disco. You've got this kind of light-ish world. It's not light, but it has this unnerving quality to it, which I really like. It just skirts the line between horror and something else.
Yeah, and it's very subtle in how it achieves it. It's not smashing you in the face with it. Obviously, the subject matter lends itself to being quite macabre, or certainly somber, and that audio and the audio enhances that for sure.
Final note on it, because I was listening as you were playing, it does stereo incredibly well. So there were sounds that were coming completely out of the left side, and not just your usual, that's over on the left, so I hear it on the left.
Yeah.
It does it with the music as well to kind of unsettle you. It was very, very clever.
Yeah, it is lovely. Really does enhance the game world.
As for price, on the eShop it retails at $24.99 or your regional equivalent, as you can see on screen, and there is a physical as with most Merge releases, and it'll take around 6 to 8 hours according to the developer.
Yeah, I think that's quite standard length for this type of game. Your kind of puzzle-based isometric game with some combat in there too. And obviously there are those collectibles if you want to seek them out.
I think that's everything we want to give away about that one. As we said at the start, if you want to win a copy of it, and trust me, you probably do, it's a very nice game, just leave your comments down below, let us know what you think of this world, what does it remind you of, and we'll try and reply to as many of those as we can.
Absolutely. A quick thank you to our patrons and our channel members for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. Take care, and until next time, happy gaming.